The RuneScape map feels cluttered. Or at least that is an argument that a lot of people tend to use when it comes to RuneScape, especially RuneScape 3 with the amount of content that this map has. And usually people want to expand the map and just put more content in new areas of the map. And that's fine. However, in this video, I'm actually going to be defending a cluttered map because I think that there's a lot of considerations that a lot of people aren't exactly having when it comes to talking about a cluttered map. First of all, let me just say that I'm not necessarily against creating new areas of the map with new content to do. I think that's a good idea, and I'm glad to see RuneScape doing that, be it with old school's Zea or RuneScape 3's Anachronia, for example, right? Or old school's C skill with the sailing, right? Map expansions I think are good, but at the same time, I also don't really just want map expansions. I think that as a whole, there needs to be a balance. And honestly, I kind of like that the RuneScape map feels cluttered. And the reason as to why is I think we need to look at the opposite side of the coin when it comes to this issue. Let's look at other MMORPGs, how they do their maps, and how it feels to play them most of the times. Because most of the times, uh, if you've ever played other MMORPGs that have extensive maps, a very frequent issue with them is that there isn't exactly nothing to do in them, or like there isn't much to do in them. A lot of the times they're really vast, but they're also really empty. And that's because it's kind of hard to have a vast map with lots of content to do. Because if you have a lot of content to do in it, it feels cluttered, right? So ultimately, at the end of the day, when it comes to RuneScape, yeah, the map can feel cluttered to a point, but I don't think it's necessarily that bad when the opposite is Zea in old school. Nowadays it's no longer the case, but when it came out, Zea was a vast continent that had nothing to do. Like literally, you had a couple of activities, but most of the map just felt incredibly empty, like extremely empty. And to have that over a cluttered map, to me, I will always want a cluttered map. And that's because cluttered maps most of the times have one thing that vast maps don't, and it's that they feel alive. Most of the times, let's take Varrock, for example. Varrock has a lot of content in both games, right? Between the Grand Exchange, the two banks that the game has, and all of the quests, and in the old school, the rooftop agility, the museum, and the house guy that sells you a house, right? The Varrock Palace and whatnot. So there's a lot of content that Varrock has, and it can feel cluttered to a point. But at the same time, think about it like this. We still use Varrock to this day. We still use Lumbridge. We still use Felidor. Even if some of these places don't see as much activity as others, because some places are just better in terms of content than others, they all do see activity, especially when it comes to clue scrolls and quests that take you around the map and just obligate you to be around the map. And oftentimes it feels really good to be playing RuneScape and, go through an area where you're like, oh wait, that quest actually took me through this area once, right? It sort of creates an history and as a result a connection to the game and its map. If Varrock was supposed to be replaced tomorrow, or Felidor, or Lumbridge, for example. In RuneScape 3, Lumbridge doesn't really see a lot of activity outside of the events in the backyard of the castle, right? But would you want Lumbridge to be removed? When there's so much history there, when there's so much content, and when you are still going there for certain quests and clue scrolls, maybe it wouldn't feel good to remove it exactly because of the amount of content that Lumbridge has had over the years and still has, and it still feels part of the map. And when I talk about quests and clue scrolls, even when other MMORPGs tend to do the same thing or try to emulate the same thing as RuneScape, they don't really feel as successful. Again, the RuneScape map, it's cluttered, but every area is like memorable. It's like you remember the entire map as a result because it just doesn't feel more of the same to fill in a vast space that, would require a lot for you to actually make it unique, right? As a result, RuneScape, due to its size, which is not that big, can make a lot of parts of the map feel very distinct from each other. And obviously, all of this is helped by the fact that the game itself and the gameplay loop of having different skills and everything, that you can just interact with almost every part of the game. And the philosophy behind a lot of the quests, which is reward you with more content, as such just means that the more you interact with the game, the more the game opens to you, as opposed of the game just being that and it never changes, right? A lot of quest areas or stuff like Prifdiness, for example, which is a very good example. Yeah, it's a new place, but it's not necessarily on the map itself. It's just a reward from a quest and the world opening itself up because you decided to explore it. That in a lot of other games isn't done to this extent because, again, the map doesn't feel as memorable with how much of it you have, but how much content you lack. The content essentially is what gives the map itself personality. It's what makes it memorable, is the reason as to why you traverse it and go through it. Because a lot of the times maps on their own, while they might be cool or the graphics might be really interesting or whatever, if they don't really have content for you to engage with, you watch it once and then you no longer give a shit about it. But in RuneScape, because so much of the map and what the map has is tied to the rest of the game, and because you don't have this huge map, you have a small map with a lot of things connected to each other, it makes it far more memorable. And again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have more places to the map. I just think that if you do, you sort of need to strike a balance of right now the content that we have in the present map is just so much that adding more to it would make it feel way too busy, way too cluttered, so it's more beneficial to add a new area as opposed of let's just have areas that have spots of certain skills or certain quests that makes Gielinor a really big game, right? A really big map, but there's not much connecting each other, or it's a shore for you to traverse. Because there is also another part of it. Oftentimes in other MMORPGs, and look, thankfully RuneScape has a lot of movement options between spells that teleport you around. RuneScape 3 has lodestones, you have minecarts in Zea, for example, you have the boating system, right, where you can fare in ships. You have a lot of rewards from teleports from achievement diaries, for example, right? So you have the fairy rings, POH portals, you have all of the necklaces with teleporting options. There's a lot of options to teleport around Gielinor, even though the map is small. But that is when you get them. Oftentimes, at the beginning of your account, you won't have this amount of teleporting options, right? Now, RuneScape already feels pretty bad without having movement options to move around and having to run everywhere. Imagine if the map was twice as big, 3 times as big, 4 times as big to get to places. It really wouldn't feel well, and that's exactly one of the reasons as to why I hate other MMORPGs sometimes, is that moving around the map is a fucking chore. While in RuneScape, because of the amount of content that you have, all of the NPCs you can talk to, all of the skilling nodes you can interact with, the monsters and everything that can be interesting and tell you a bit about that part of the map, because of that, traversing through Gielinor, even when you don't have teleports, isn't as much of a chore as in other games because the map has a lot of content, which means that the map is far more interesting to interact with and to traverse than if it was just vast but didn't have a lot of content. And again, even if you could fill a huge map with a lot of content, not only do I think that's a bit unattainable from the perspective of if you have a big map to fill it with content, I mean, Gielinor already has spots in it that don't have a lot of content, and it's already a map that is pretty fucking cramped to begin with. Imagine other MMORPGs, right? It gets even worse, and you need to do far more work, and ultimately, would it feel better? Because I think that the argument would then become, oh, we just need a bigger map, and a bigger map. And I just don't think that that would necessarily solve things. I think that striking a good balance between having newer areas with enough content for you to actually engage with, like, sailing, for example. If sailing comes out and there's no activities at sea, yeah, sure, you expanded the map a lot, but what the fuck is there to do? And chances are, from what I understand, Jagex isn't actually going to be expanding the Gillenor map. They're just going to be filling the sea with, well, sailing activities. So, yeah, expanding the map and it feeling crammed, while to a point that is bad, overall I think that people are missing the memo that at least it feels alive, at least it feels connected to each other, and I would rather have a map that is crammed, that is actually memorable to traverse, than a vast map that is really big, but there's nothing to do in it.